Hello, this is Heather Deacon, Director of Business Affairs and Treasurer for National Capital Presbytery. Welcome to our 2024 budget presentation. Thank you for setting aside a few minutes to watch. I know that everyone doesn't share my excitement about budgets and numbers, but I do hope that you'll find our time together useful. I'd like to start by walking you through how our budget is developed. Developing our budget really starts with a familiar premise. As Presbyterians, we believe in the connectional nature of the church. We are connected by our polity and by our faith, obviously, but I also believe that we are connected by our budgets. At least in National Capital Presbytery, I like to believe that our budgets, or rather the money that is used to create our budgets, connect us to each other. And so if we start with the money, we have three main sources. We have the faithful witness of yesterday's saints, which takes the form often of endowments. We also have funds received from dissolutions and property sales, and then we have funds received from our churches. And those typically come in as unified giving, per capita, and special offerings. And even within these sources, we can start to see some connections. And then as the money flows through the budget, we see the same patterns. And then as a presbytery, generally, we support growth opportunities, ministries of our churches, and then leadership development. And just as before, you see connections that can be made between these three areas. And so as you prayerfully consider the budgets that we're going to review in this presentation, I hope that the idea that our budgets connect us as a presbytery to each other, to our churches, to our communities, to our past, and to our present, to our future, I hope that that idea stays in the front of your mind. Rooted in that connection, you'll see how it plays out in the development process. So budget development falls broadly in three main areas. We have the budget guidance memo, we have committee requests, and then we have our funding plan. The process really kicks off with Budget and Finance Committee developing the guidance memo. And in doing this, they evaluate and analyze the economic landscape and our specific giving trends. I'm sure that it shocks no one that as Presbyterians, we have a lot of records and data. And so the committee really relies on that information to develop the guidance memo draft. Given the mixed messages that our economy has consistently been giving us over the last several months, it should come as no surprise that this year's guidance memo recommended that committees make reductions to their individual budgets where possible. The next step is the committees and commissions get that memo and they review their current year budget and assess the work they're being called to do in 2024, and then determine the resources that are needed to do that work. Those requests come back to the Budget and Finance Committee, and then they begin compiling the budgets. As a side note, this is a huge place where your voice can be heard. If when you are reviewing these budgets, you don't see a priority that you want to see there, you are encouraged to get involved with that committee and use your voice to make a change. I know that the nominating committee stands ready to help match your gifts and your passions with work that needs to be done by our committees and by our commissions. So once the requests have been reviewed and input into the budget, Budget and Finance begins creating the funding plan. And that plan really has two big components. The first is the recommendation on the annual draws off of our investments from the investment committee. And then the second is the per capita rate. Once the funding plan is put into the budget, the budgets are ready to be reviewed. And that starts with budget and finance reviewing and voting on those draft budgets. From there, leadership council reviews and votes on the draft budgets. And then that brings us to where we are now. It is time for Presbytery to review and vote on the draft budgets. And that action will hopefully lead us towards having our finalized budgets in place. Now, you've heard me mention budgets, plural, and I hope that everyone is aware, but just in case you aren't, National Capital Presbytery has two budgets. We have our operating budget, and then we have our mission budget. And speaking in broad strokes, the operating budget funds National Capital Presbytery staff, Presbytery office space, office expenses, funds the Committee on Ministry, COM, and the Commission on the Preparation for Ministry, CPM, and then it also funds various middle governing body expenses. The mission budget funds National Capital Presbytery mission staff. It funds Congregational Development Commission, which is CDC, and it funds the Mission Coordination Committee, or MCC. We're going to start by reviewing the operating budget first. And as you can see from this graphic, the operating budget funds a variety of things. I won't list them all here, but I encourage you to take a look at the 2024 draft budget and our 2023 impact report, which does a phenomenal job of outlining what is funded through which budget. For simplicity's sake, I like to say that the operating budget covers all of the things that it takes to actually run the presbytery and its office in order to meet our responsibility as laid out in our polity. The 2024 operating budget as proposed is $1,153,473.92, which represents a 3.2% increase over 2023. I'm going to review a handful of highlights, but again, I encourage you to do a really good read through for yourselves. The biggest change that you will see in this year's operating budget is a realigning of several line items in three specific categories: the office expense category, the middle governing body expense category, and the Committee on Ministry COM category. And that simply means that we took some items and moved them out of one expense category and into another. For example, we moved our insurance and our audit fees out of office expense and into middle governing body expense. One item to note when you're reviewing these categories is that the lease for the presbytery office ends in December of 2024, so next year. So you will see a new line item for moving expenses, which is offset by an increase in an appropriate investment draw. Additionally, there is a new line item under middle governing body for professional expenses, which is the cost of outsourcing some of our bookkeeping needs. Taking into account new line items, realigning expenses, and increased funding draws, the total change in these three categories collectively is a 9.8% increase over 2023. Office salaries are coming in with a 0.5% increase. The recommendation from personnel is that staff receive a 2.2% cost of living increase, which is included in this budget. We aren't recognizing the impact of the full 2.2% due to tweaks in staffing made during the 2023 year, and that will be reflected in the 2024 draft budget. The staff board of pensions reflects a 6% decrease, and again, this is due to changes in individual staff insurance selection rather than a reduction in premiums or dues. And then lastly, highlights on the operating budget. The Commission on Preparation for Ministry, CPM, is up 9%, and this is due almost entirely to an increase in the calculated scholarship draw. When we talk about funding the operating budget, we really have four sources. We have the office fund, the retreat fund, the scholarship fund, and then we have per capita. The office fund was established to offset the cost of operating expenses. The current balance in the fund is $872,002. And the recommended draw from that fund for 2024 is $200,000. This draw amount is up $25,000 in order to help fund our Presbytery office move. As I mentioned earlier, our lease is up in December of 2024, and we anticipate a move in the late fall of next year. And that move will allow for a smaller draw in the future, extending the life of this fund, because we do anticipate moving into a space with a hopefully significantly reduced rent amount. The next funding source is the retreat fund. It supplements our annual continuing education clergy and church professionals retreat. This fund was replenished in 2023 with monies from the now closed Riverdale Presbyterian Church. With that replenishment, we went ahead and we restored the draw amount to its pre-2022 level. The scholarship fund supports seminarians coming out of National Capital Presbytery, and it is administered by CPM. And I do want to point out that all of these draws, even the increased office fund and the return to the previously funded levels of the retreat fund, all of these draws really are in alignment with our historical draw amount. And so that leaves us with per capita. And while it is the last on the list, this is not because it is the least important, but rather because of how the rate is calculated each year. Essentially, we back into that number. So once we have the expenses and then we deduct the investment draws, we are left with the need. And that remaining number, that need, is divided by the membership of National Capital Presbytery churches from 2 years prior. So in this case, the membership numbers of 2022. And so calculating per capita last, we hope allows us to minimize the financial impact to our churches. On the screen here, you see a graph of NCP membership since 2010. And the numbers reflect the trend that we know to be true. Our membership is shrinking. Each governing body, GA, Senate, and then National Capital, each governing body assessed a per capita on membership numbers from 2 years prior. So 2024 per capita is assessed on 2022 membership. The 2022 membership number for National Capital Presbytery decreased by 1,240 members. And then, so each of those governing bodies sets a per capita rate to cover their expenses. And then the sum of those three amounts is the total per capita amount assessed on each member. So here you are going to see the per capita recommendation. We have General Assembly coming in at $9.80, which is a 5-cent reduction in the 2023 rates. The Senate rate remained the same. And then National Capital Presbytery is proposing a $37.61 rate. Those three numbers combine to equal a proposed per capita rate of $48.56, which is a total increase of $1.43. And while it is not always the case, this year's per capita increase is entirely related to our membership loss. So as we finish up the 2024 budget, I want to leave you with just a few actions. First, please review the operating budget details, which are included in the budget packet. Come then with any questions to the action item dialogue on Monday, November the 13th, ahead of the November Presbytery meeting, which is on November the 14th. And then you can always email any questions to staff at National Capital Presbytery. And then lastly, on the operating budget, you will see the motion that you are going to be asked to vote on at the November Presbytery meeting. It's there on the screen. And so now we are going to turn ourselves to the mission budget. And just like with the operating budget, you'll see on this graphic some of the fantastic things that the mission budget funds. I again recommend that you take a look at the 2024 draft budget in the budget packet and our 2023 impact report, which has such great detail about what our budgets support. Generally speaking, the mission budget does just what it says. It funds the mission priorities of not just National Capital Presbytery, but of the churches that make up our presbytery. And then the 2024 mission budget, as proposed, is $982,507.53, which represents a 1% decrease over 2023. And as we move through this slide, you will see that there is very little change over last year. I believe in large part that is because several of our committees, specifically CDC and MCC, completed an overhaul of their budgets in 2023. And so there was just not a significant amount of change for 2024. Again, I recommend that you spend some time reviewing the budget for yourselves, but I am going to give you just a handful of highlights. CDC, the Commission on Congregational Development, reduced their expenses by 2%. MCC, the Mission Coordinating Committee, reduced their expenses by 5%. And then staff salaries and Board of Pensions increased by 4% and 0.2% respectively. So just like in the operating budget, these are a result of a 2.2% cost of living increase. And then additionally, applying the cost of living increase, COLA, to the mission calibration that's used to offset the cost of non-mission budget staff whose work overlaps with the mission of National Capital Presbytery. And so when we talk about funding the mission budget, we really have 5 sources. We've got Unified Giving, we've got the NCP Resurrection Fund, the DC Resurrection Fund, the New Growth Fund, and Mission Reserves. Unified Giving is separate from per capita. It is money given specifically by our churches to support the mission of the presbytery. Participation in unified giving is a vital part of living into the connected nature of our presbytery. These dollars flow out into our communities through our congregations, connecting our churches to each other and to the shared work that they are doing. We'll talk a little bit more about unified giving in a moment, but it really is a critical part of funding the mission budget. Next, you have the NCP Resurrection and then the DC Resurrection funds. And draws off the interest of these 2 funds provide a consistent layer of funding to the mission budget. Below and on the screen, you can see both the current balances and the anticipated draws off of these funds for 2024. The New Growth Fund specifically funds seed money for new projects and work done with a New Things team under the direction of CDC. The anticipated draw and current balance are shown for this fund on the screen as well. And then I think it's important to note that, again, The draws off of these funds are in alignment with our historical draws. Lastly, we have mission reserves, and these reserves are from years prior when the entire mission budget wasn't spent. Excess funds that were budgeted and not spent go into mission reserves. And for the last few years, we have balanced the mission budget using our reserves. As you can see, the reserves are diminishing, and we are actively working on a plan to address this. However, the quickest and the easiest thing that can happen would be to see an increase in unified mission giving. On this slide, you will see the trend in unified mission giving, the dollars that fund our congregational development, our transforming grants, our mission grants, our college ministry programs, our fellowships. That giving is down 32% in 10 years. 2022 saw an 11% decrease in unified giving over 2021. And I shared in last year's presentation that we found that of the 103 churches in our presbytery, 37 had not contributed to unified giving since at least 2018. For 2023, giving has increased slightly over 2022, but we are still budgeting for a 4% reduction in unified mission giving for 2024. And so as we wrap up the mission budget, you again have a couple of actions, but good news, they are the same as the actions for the operating budget. First, please review the mission budget details, which are included in the packet. Come then with any questions to the action item dialogue on Monday, November the 13th, ahead of the November Presbytery meeting on the 14th. And then you can also email any questions to NCP office. And then lastly, you see on the screen the motion that you will be asked to vote on at that November Presbytery meeting. And so as we wrap up this 2024 budget presentation, I want to take us back to the slide that we started with. The idea that our budget is one of the things that connects us to each other, connecting us to our past and connecting us to our future. And as we reflect on that connection and how we are called to participate in it, I want to add that the work being done by us as a presbytery in our communities, that work is done in support of our mission to be missional and pastoral and prophetic so that our churches can grow. Thank you all for your time. I look forward to discussing and reviewing the information in this presentation in our budgets with you at the action item dialogue on Monday, November 13th. And as always, our staff welcomes you to email any questions that you might have.